Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and business owners. Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing, is customer experience disappearing in a sea of indifference? Think about it. What was the last time that you had great customer service from an organization or a company that you went into? Or are you finding now that we're not getting that same kind of customer service that we got a couple of years back? Well, joining me in the studio today is Jerry Barron. He is the customer lifeguard. Jerry, it's lovely to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Steve.
You're looking very well, as always. Any marathons run since we last saw you?
No, that's really the marathon of customer service is probably the one I'm focusing on right now, and that's quite a long trip, but we're making progress.
For people that don't know who you are, just a quick reminder, it's the water cooler pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I've spent most of my life in the customer experience world in one way or the other. Starting off, I worked for Bell Canada for many years and learned a lot about communicating with people and so on in Canada. I've been in the UK for almost 20 years now, and really working now more with organizations, helping them focus on what makes customer experience work for them, but also how do they enable it. So there's two parts of that. There's the strategy, and then there's quite often the enablement of it, and we may get into that a little bit later on. But really, how do you make sure that all of the things that you've decided are important to you can actually be made to work through the technology that you've got to support it? So a lot of my work is doing that kind of stuff now. So I'm a great customer myself, or perhaps I'm a bad customer, I'm not sure which. But I feel very strongly about it, and I think, as you pointed out, we're still struggling a little bit with customer service and customer experience.
Do you think then, as the title suggests, is customer service, the customer experience, are we drifting into a world of indifference?
Well, I think we don't have to look too far from some of the things that have happened recently. Think about the BA meltdown. Think about the United Airlines. Once again, they made the headlines. And very recently, of course, we've got Ryanair. And I think what's very telling about it, there was a very interesting piece on the One Show on Friday night where they talked to a number of customers that had had bad experiences with Ryanair. As people may know, Ryanair have been cancelling very large numbers of flights because of a problem with staffing. And interspersed in that was an interview with Michael O'Leary, and
who was the CEO
of Ryanair. And what was fascinating was that there were people on there saying, we'll never fly with Ryanair again, we hate them, and all of the kinds of things you'd expect. And his response was, my booking engine is full of people who said they would never fly with Ryanair again. And I think this is one of the challenges people face. Is that
do you think it's becoming acceptable now for businesses to be thinking to themselves, well, actually, the customer experience, there is no real benefit of actually making it any better than what it is. If you have what they want, they're going to come and buy it from you.
I think it's a certain aspect of that, and it was interesting. I was reading about people who, some organizations, and perhaps again the Ryanairs and the BAs of the world, in which perhaps the organization simply doesn't care. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just taking that too far. Maybe that's not right. But I read a piece by a guy called Tim Ferriss, who's a very well-known blogger and podcaster in the U.S. And he asks his guests every time on the show, he says, what would you put on a billboard? And one of his guests was a guy called Mike Birbiglia, who's a well-known U.S. comedian. And he said, I'd put a billboard in Times Square, which, as we know, like Piccadilly Circus, has lots of very large adverts in it. And he said, I'd put a billboard that said, none of these companies care about you. And I thought that was a very telling thing, and that's the feeling we get sometimes, that these people actually don't care.
But do you think sometimes now we're getting to a stage where it's becoming acceptable, and in fact, the customer doesn't care? They're annoyed, they may actually experience the situation, but long term, it really doesn't matter.
I think you've hit a great point, Steve, is that that's the point. That's what effectively Michael O'Leary was saying. People will complain or moan, but they actually won't do anything about it. So as customers, I think we have a certain responsibility. It's not just the company. And one of the things I try to do in the work that I do is to really to put some of the, if you like, the pressure on the customer.
I remember the first time I saw you,
Yes.
I saw you speaking, and you were doing, I think, one of your shorter keynotes. And you were advocating, in fact, you were promoting within the room that everybody should complain.
Absolutely.
Do you think do you think we've lost the art of complaining? Do you think we understand how it should be done, or do a lot of people pick the phone up, yell and scream, but actually achieve nothing?
I do believe that, and that was the point of that particular presentation, which I called "Let's Get Ready to Grumble," and I think it's still the same. I think people do feel frustration, so they do call the customer service lines, and they find they get employees that aren't able to help them. It's not that they don't want to, but in many cases they simply aren't able to help them. They're not engaged, and they're not empowered. So as a result, yes, they get frustrated, and they end up not doing anything about it, or they fly with Ryanair or BA again, and they just it's almost like they give up. And I think it is about how they complain, and that's really what that was what I was seeking to do, to help people understand that if you do it in the right way, if you go to the top quite quickly, if you ask for some specific things that you want, and you lay it out in a way that's done politely and done but firmly, you will get response, and the organization themselves will begin to see that they need to change. Because until they get that message, nothing will happen.
Conversely, do you think we've forgotten how to praise?
Well, I think there's an equally responsible thing for people to do in the same way. I do try and do that. I use social media quite frequently because it's the easiest way to do it. Various examples I've had recently in places like Pret a Manger and some of the coffee shops and so on, where I've had fabulous service, and I've right away gone on to Twitter or Facebook and immediately sent something to the organization. And it's great because you usually get something back because they're delighted to hear that people actually care about it. And I think you're right. I think it's as important, if not more important, to do that. And I think, again, working with organizations as I do, I see the result of that feedback. Last week, I was very fortunate to be a judge for the European Customer Service Awards. And for 2 days, I viewed a number of submissions from quite a broad range of customers. I can't really share who they were at this point because they're still clearly in the phases of being judged. But what really impressed me was the fact that people that were doing the submissions, and they were both some of them were the frontline people, some of them were the managers and so on, but all of them really showed how when they got this really positive customer feedback through voice of the customer, through surveys or whatever way they did it, the response, the people was just amazing. We shouldn't be surprised at this, but it simply doesn't happen enough. And I think you're right. The more that we as customers, we need to respond positively. We do need to let people know if they're doing a great job.
In monetary terms, do you think it actually adds to the bottom line then? If you're giving good customer service and getting those responses, Michael O'Leary would say, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how badly you treat the paying public. They'll still keep coming back for more, and you'll still keep making profits. Do you think then that it does have an impact on the bottom line? Because it doesn't seem to in the case of Ryanair.
Well, I think the thing is that they have been extremely successful. I think by his own admission last week, I think he suggested that this was going to cost them somewhere in the region of £25 million or euros, I guess they are in Ireland. But compared to how much money they're making, that is a drop in the bucket. But I think there is a lot of statistical evidence that organizations that are more successful are being more successful financially. And again, a great example of that, I think, is an organization that I've come to know quite well recently, a company called HomeServe. A little while ago, HomeServe were fined £31 million by the Financial Conduct Authority, FSA as they were then, for mis-selling, very much like PPI. At that time, a £31 million fine for them was pretty high, but they managed to turn things around very effectively over the last 3 or 4 years. They've now become known as one of the best organizations for customer service, a great place to work through Glassdoor and through Bloomberg, and they have doubled their share price and their profits. So it's shown that here's an organization that was not highly regarded, that was in a very bad place. By focusing on customer experience, and they've done some really wonderful things, you can change it. And they're not the only company to be in that way. And if you look at it on the other side of things, recently we've heard Bell Pottinger, who got into a lot of trouble to the extent where their UK business has pretty much collapsed. That was the words used in the media, because of some bad things they did in South Africa. Some really, they got involved in the whole political situation there, and got involved in a very, very nasty situation. Now, they don't have hundreds of customers, but they had customers leaving in droves to the extent where the business has collapsed. So I don't think there's any question that where it works well, companies that have done this well definitely show the financial advantages of it.
Do you think it's down to the internal voice within the business? So, for instance, Michael O'Reilly, once again, O'Leary rather, he was criticising, he was quite rude about his pilots, in fact, his skilled workers within the organisation. That kind of management by fear culture, nearly, do you think that has big impacts on the way the entire company responds to the customer experience?
It certainly does. And again, I had a very good experience of that recently. I just flew to Canada a few weeks ago. And historically, I'd always gone with Air Canada. Air Canada is the flag airline, as BA here is. And I decided I was going to change that. I'd had some of the same bad experiences with Air Canada that people have had with BA. And we went with an organization called WestJet. Now, WestJet is a domestic airline, or has been a domestic airline in Canada for many years, and a very successful one. They started to fly internationally about a year ago, two years ago, I think now. And the experience I had with clearly employees that were engaged, the first time I realized it was with the safety announcement. As we know, that is regulated. You must have a safety announcement. But the way they did it with humor, and everyone listened. And they're not the first airline to do this, but you just got a sense that these people were really proud about what they were doing and that they wanted to be where they were. Compare that with, as you noticed, the things that O'Leary's been saying about his pilots. And I believe you can only say that for so long. They've lost a lot of pilots to Norwegian Air. That's one of the places they've gone. He was very derogatory about Norwegian Air as well. And the question is, how long can you continue to do that until it really does start to backfire on you? And I don't know. With Ryanair, they're a little bit different. And of course, this is a big part of O'Leary's shtick. This whole thing that he does.
The persona.
It's the persona. It's the it's the Millwall approach to customer service. Nobody likes us, and we don't care.
Listen, we're going to come back. We're going to be talking to Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard, in just a few moments' time here on this edition of Business Connections Live. Actually, I had the opportunity or the need just recently actually to complain twice to my bank. Now, I'm not a big lover of my bank, actually. I think my bank has changed. I'm not going to say who it is, but I think the actual the banking institution that I bank with, been with them all my life, and have expressed this view to them as well. However, I will say that I did complain to them. I took up the mantle and I went in there and I complained and did get results. And I think and what they were good at was identifying, doing something about it. There is always this fallback, though, when you have large, but the energy companies, the banking institutions, people like that, they're always throwing you back to the ombudsman, aren't they? Mm-hmm. That seems to be the backstop of every complaint that you actually have. But if you haven't complained, if there's something you feel you should be complaining about, maybe even just picking the phone up and giving maybe your broadband supplier a call to find out why are you on a more expensive tariff? Why is there a cheaper one there that it hasn't been promoted to you? Pick the phone up and just have a go. So then, you're watching Business Connections Live. Great to have your company as always. I'll tell you what we'll do right now. Let's go back to last week's program. We were all talking about social media. Nikki Creel joined me here in the studio. A really interesting program. I don't know whether I agree with everything she said. I agreed with 99.9% of everything she said. But have we? The question was, have we lost this whole realization that, humour is made up of sarcasm at times and, put down humour, it makes people laugh. But when you start putting it on social media, the wheels can come off the bus and you can get yourself into all sorts of trouble. It was a cracking show last week. Agree or disagree, you should watch the entire programme. It was Nikki Creel talking about workplace social media policies. Were they too harsh? Here's what happened in last week's edition of the programme. Today's show, we're going to be discussing social media policies for staff. Let me ask you a question. What about your social media policies in your business? Are they just too harsh? Joining me in the studio today is the fabulous Nikki Creel.
I think the problem is that a lot of businesses don't actually understand, or business owners and employers don't necessarily understand how social media works, and so they're overreacting or trying to be draconian in terms of trying to suppress what people can say. You shouldn't be treating people differently because they've done something online than if they've done it offline. So you should be using the same rules. So if it's something that is something that you need to have a grievance procedure for, then that's what you do, rather than necessarily fire somebody the first instant that they do a tweet that's gone wrong. I have the policy of, if you're nice to people, nobody's necessarily going to get offended, but I've been angry once or twice, which you shouldn't do when you're on social media. So I suppose I've snapped at somebody or reacted to somebody, whereas if I'd come back to it, I wouldn't. When I reread it, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was in the moment. I think the first thing is to have something, is to have written guidelines. Because it protects the company. You want to protect things like confidentiality, and you want to make it clear and helpful for your employees, so they know what to expect or what the guidelines are. Because if you've got very vague, and the problem is a lot of policies that when people do have a policy, it's just filled up with legalese, which most people don't read. There's a case of somebody who had very few followers and did a tweet which she thought would only reach her few followers, and it went viral. It got picked up because she wasn't just anybody. She was worked for PR, a worldwide PR agency. So by the time she got down to Cape Town, when she switched on her phone, it just kept on pinging. She had mass media, the paparazzi were at the station, and she'd been fired. So there are things that you might do in private, and whether she should have been sacked or not over one tweet, because I know that the Surrey police, they will take it, if you say something on Twitter, they will take it in the same procedures that they would if you'd said it in person or somebody had reported it in person. Don't put anything out there that you might regret, and especially if it's about business, if you're working for a company. Firstly, it's foolhardy, and this is what has happened with a few people. They've gone, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm sick." And then they post pictures of themselves on Facebook, which shows that they're not sick. Hi, I'm Nikki Creel, social media consultant, and we've been talking about social media policies today. And I think the main thing is, don't have a social media policy. Well, firstly, have a social media policy. If you don't have one, you really need to get one written as soon as possible. But make sure it's not full of legalese. Make sure that it's not like, if you do this, we'll take you out in front of a firing squad and shoot you, because some people have got that type of, like, you are not allowed to say that you belong to this company at all or mention them in any way possible, which I think is excessive. But you also need to give clear examples of what may be appropriate, or examples, say, like, if you say, I don't want you to use social media during company time, but if somebody is sharing company content, you might want them to use social media during company time. So you might say, treat social media, your personal social media time, in the same way that you would do a personal phone call or a personal email, and then people understand that they are using their own time, that they're using social media for that thing. So you might say, we're happy for you to use social media as long as it adds value to the company. So it's really about having a policy that people can understand, that is in a human language, it's not full of legalese, but also gets you covered, so that you can say, this is never acceptable. It's never acceptable to talk about a project we're working on, or it's never acceptable to talk about clients or your customers. So it gives the boundaries. It also helps your employees understand what is acceptable and not acceptable. And the positive side is you can actually your employees could actually be doing a good thing for you in terms of they are your best advocates. So they could be sharing how brilliant it is. So it's not all bad stuff and negative stuff in social media.
Really interesting program. Social media. Everything you say is truly in the public domain. Don't ever forget that. That's the real power of social media. If you enjoyed that program, or maybe you're enjoying this one, I'm sure you are with my guest today, why not have a program like this one for your own organisation? Just think about that. If you're sending out newsletters, or you want to communicate on a one-to-one basis, or you've got something that's really important that needs a little bit more explanation behind it, then you should get a program just like this one, especially for your business. It's dead easy to do. If you'd like to find out more details of how we can transform your written words into the spoken word, in fact transform them rather into television, then why don't you get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live? It's dead easy to do that. You can drop us an email to studio@businessconnectionslive.com. If you want, you can pick the dog and bone up as well on 01784 256 777 and have a word with one of the team here. We'd love to hear what the problems are that you've got within your organisation so that we can help you out on that. Don't forget as well, you can follow our stream of consciousness on the Twitter. We say really nice things on there, and we tell you also who's coming up in the program. We retweet things as well. Thank you to all the people that tweet us. That's at BCL Business TV. What else we got? Facebook. Yes, you can go to Facebook. Facebook always proven to be very successful. Thank you very much to all the people who are endorsing our business page and watching our programs on Facebook as well. And don't forget, you can go to the main website at businessconnectionslive.com. Listen, everything's there. We are everywhere. So make certain that you catch up with over 250 hours of free business advice each and every week. Is all there for you, and it's all absolutely free. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest in the studio today is Jerry Brown. He is the customer lifeguard. We're asking the question today, is customer experience disappearing into a sea of indifference? Are we just all becoming somewhat blasé about it, or do we think there is no point in doing anything when it comes to complaining or talking to anybody within organisations because we feel they're just not listening to us anymore? Jerry, some key points from the customer's perspective, I suppose. What, in your opinion, do you think customers want more than anything else when things do go wrong? When we listen to the TV, you often hear the phrase, nobody told us anything. Exactly. Is that the key, or is it the fact that the staff didn't know either?
I think that's certainly part of it. And the way I put it is that there's probably three key things that most people want. They want an acknowledgement. They want someone to tell them, Mr. Brown, thank you for calling. I'm sorry you've had a problem with this, and we'll do our best to sort it out. They want an acceptance of responsibility, or they want accountability. So the person that you're speaking to, Mr. Brown, I'll do my best to sort this out for you. I realize this is a concern. Let me see what I can do about it. And then they want action. They want you to actually do something. So it's not just about talking about it, we'll see if we can fix this. They want some really clear action. And if you can provide those three things for people, it's amazing how well they will respond and how well your advisors, or whatever you call your people that deal with customer service, will feel about it. If I can give you a quick example, I mentioned I flew on WestJet to Canada. And like many airlines, they do charge you for individual items, which is fine. If you get a good deal on the price, you don't mind. Exactly. So we were flying from Toronto to Vancouver. So I had to go online and choose my seats, pay for my seat and my baggage. Fine. I had a minor problem online. So I wasn't able to complete the transaction. So I picked up the phone and called them. The first person I spoke to said, I'm sorry, I really don't know why you're having a problem, but let me see what I can do. I'm going to put you in touch with one of our support people. I immediately got through to a support person. I didn't have to wait on hold for a long time, explain my story all over again. She was very aware of what I was going on. She said, Mr. Brown, yes, I can see there's been some difficulty. We have had a few issues with our website, because quite often what happens is they blame you. It goes something like, well, nobody else has had a problem, so it must be you. So she very quickly said, let me book those seats for you. What seats would you like? I told her what would we like. She said, Mr. Brown, as you had to call us twice about this, there'll be no charge for that. And, oh, are you going to be checking in any bags? I said, yes, we'll have one bag each. She said, fine, I'll take care of that for you. There'll be no charge for that either. So that was $100 that we didn't have to pay. She was clearly empowered. She didn't have to go and ask anyone. She didn't have to go and find out if she could do this or not. And she did it with great grace and empathy. And that's what you have to be able to do. But you can't do that unless your people are engaged and empowered.
It's interesting as well, because the other thing about it is here you are talking about it.
Exactly.
It made a difference. I don't know whether this story is folklore or not, but apparently a department store in America, somebody would come in and complain. They would say, yes, Mr. Smith is in charge of that. They would call Mr. Smith over, berate him in front of the customer and fire him. And that was his job. His job was to be fired in front of the customer. Now, whether that's folklore or not, I think that's really a great idea.
It is.
Because then you get the customer going, no, I don't want him fired. I just wanted to come in and complain a little bit. And I don't know whether that's real or not. But an interesting, once again, because that's the kind of thing.
Yes.
That people will, my director's saying, that's what we need.
More of
that's
that.
what we need. He's saying, he's whispering
More of
in, more of that, fire them all.
Exactly.
But it is interesting, that complete difference there for a moment.
Yes.
That has made such a difference to your impression of the organisation.
Sure.
I just came back from holiday. I arrived at the hotel, and I have not stopped telling everybody how we were upgraded from a partial sea-facing room to a villa with a pool. Now, I'm really going to tell everybody about that. And they did it gracefully. Every time I came in, they had that knowing look in their eye going, he's done all right out of that holiday. But it's just that little bit of customer service, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. And again, it's about having the ability to do it. So it won't happen every time. So when you tell stories like this, then people say, oh, yes, well, Jerry, you tell these stories, and of course everyone's going to phone WestJet and tell them they had a problem and hopefully they're going to get $100 off. Well, it doesn't work that way. I think legitimate concerns, and the reality is that an organization, again, that is enabled well technically will know if you're trying something on. Here's this guy, Jerry Brown, again, he's calling us trying to get a freebie. Most organizations will recognize that, and most of us aren't that way. Most of us have respect for people, and most of us want to do the right thing. So if it gets fixed, it's really nice.
Do you think it works across all industries? Here you are, it's one-to-one with an airline. What about, should we say, the circumstances that we've had with British Rail or Southern, as it is?
Sure.
Those kind of services, those kind of mass utility organisations, but particularly transport.
Right.
Can they do the same thing? For instance, if you're standing on a platform, you're not really in the position to be given the kind of service that you just got from the airline.
No. I think you must have been following me around, Steve, because I've had these issues. I do unfortunately have to deal with Southern. It's all my fault. I am unfortunately held captive by Southern Rail more often than not, and the point that you raise is an excellent one. I was at a station just last week, and they had some delays. And most of us will understand delays. Most of us don't have an issue. This was a problem with the overhead wires. Fine. I get that. If you have a problem with the overhead wires, I want you to fix it. I don't want that to be a problem. But what I do want you to do is provide me with some reasonable explanation and then some hope of when the next train might be coming along. Now, that didn't happen. It was quite interesting. I almost wanted to record exactly what was going on at the station with the announcements and so on. And people were standing around really not knowing what was going on. And one of the comments that I make is that quite often the lack of communication is the fear of litigation. And I think this is true with the BA situation. The people there clearly in the background probably knew what was happening.
We still don't know, do we?
Well, I don't think we really know, because Willie Walsh was very unclear and very, really hid behind a lot of corporate jargon. But I think the reality is that if they say, they're afraid if they say too much, and this could be the planes, it could be the trains, someone's going to pick up on that and go, oh, you told me this, so I'm going to take, I'm going to sue you or do something else. We've seen with the Ryanair situation where, in fact, they tried to hide some of that information so that customers couldn't get compensation.
I mean, some people are saying, and I know we keep going on about Ryanair, other budget airlines are available, but they are saying that it was cheaper for them to cancel those flights than it was to pay the fees or the fines for being late. So they took a business decision.
Yes. Yes,
to actually
indeed.
say, okay, in that case, we'll just inconvenience, 500,000 passengers,
a lot of
because
people.
it is cheaper for us to do that, to pay those fines, than it is to do the late fines.
And that's quite often the case. But in going back to your original question, firstly, organizations that truly have engaged people typically find that they have people that can explain it, they can take care of it, as I found out with my WestJet experience. Whereas organizations that don't empower their people, where the people aren't engaged, my guess is that there are very few Southern employees that are engaged. You've got half of the organization going on strike on a regular basis. You've got many of them really upset with what's going on. How can you get engagement from people like that when you've got that kind of strife going on? Now, you could argue, well, it's the union's fault or whoever it is, but the point is, it's very difficult to operate positively in a situation like that. So organizations, but size should not be a factor. Yes, they've got to perhaps educate and train more people. I don't dispute that. But there was a very interesting, Which magazine, which you know quite well, every year talks about their customer service. They do a survey of customer experience and customer service. And there was a very interesting quote in this year's survey, which came out last month, in which somebody said that they were interviewing, said there's absolutely no reason big companies cannot provide that level of service if you have the right people. And that's a big if, of course.
We're talking a lot about big companies. Let's talk a little bit about small companies.
Sure.
And also the internal voice of the company.
Absolutely.
Because it's there. Ryanair, once again, we have an internal voice that is somewhat destructive. Within, shall we say, Southern Rail, there is a destructive voice because they're not communicating particularly well. Do you think businesses need to have an internal voice that understands the business, to have a sympathetic internal voice?
There's no question, and again, one of the things I talk about a lot is commitment. Commitment from the senior executive, but also commitment from the bottom up. If you have that, if the senior people, and my example about HomeServe was a really good example of how that changed. HomeServe brought in a new CMO, a guy named Greg Reed, who's now gone on to be their CEO. And he had a tremendous impact by coming in, recognizing what the issues were, being honest and candid enough to admit to within the organization what was going on, and then to be able to affect change by doing it. Because when people see that, when people see they're not hiding behind excuses, they're not hiding behind other things as BA did with their situation, people will come on board with you, because that's what you need to do. You need to bring everyone on board. Simply because the CEO or somebody says we're going to do something doesn't mean it will happen. But if they see them being very vocal, being passionate about it, it's very easy for them to get on board soon. So absolutely, having people make that kind of statement, make those commitments, admit if things have gone wrong and why they've gone wrong, but clearly have a path for both the company and the people to follow will make a huge difference.
It's very interesting. Let's look at some of the other areas that we've got here. The value, I mean, it's interesting as well what you're saying about the litigation, but the value of empowering employees to make it personal and let them be themselves. I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's talk about that, and also how strong organisational engagement is more than the sum of parts. And also, I suppose a question from my point of view is, how important are the people in all of this? At what point do you win people over, win their hearts to make it work properly for you? Is it very easy to lose their hearts and for it all to go to mush in front of your very eyes? So we'll talk more about that. My guest of today's programme is Jerry Brown. He is the customer lifeguard. Hope you find today's programme interesting. And it really, many of the things that we've talked about today, they apply to all sizes of organisations and businesses. It doesn't matter whether you're a 1, 2 or a 3-man band. I mean, we've only got to open our mouths once, catch us on a bad day, and that could have all sorts of ramifications. And really, we've just got to be conscious of that all the time. And as I say, the customer, as always, is king. My guest of today's show is Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard. You're watching Business Connections Live. Great to have you with us as always, and we do try to bring you as much valuable information on each and every one of our programmes. We're live on a Monday, of course, at midday. And let's go back to one of our previous programmes. Big brand lessons for SMEs. What lessons can you learn from the large organisations that are out there? An organisation that's been in the news recently has been the AA. We had Michael Johnson from the AA. He was on the programme. We were discussing we were talking through things on how you should go about marketing your products, marketing your wares, and what kind of examples you can steal from those large organisations like the AA and apply to your company. Here are the key takeaways from that programme.
I'm Michael Johnson. I'm Managing Director of AA Financial Services, and we're talking about taking things to market and some of the things you should be aware of. For my money, it's about having a plan, and having a plan means, firstly, you need to be passionate about what you're doing, but you also need to be objective and ruthless about some of the decisions that you'll make along the way. The plan that I would recommend sort of starts at the top with the big picture, such as understanding the market. Once you've understood the market and where you fit, you would then understand the customer and understand the customer's needs, because there's no point producing a product that doesn't meet a customer's needs. From then, you would go on to define your proposition, to test and prototype your product, and then take it to market with a well thought through business plan. And hopefully from there, it's plain sailing.
It's Michael Johnson there from the AA. He's a cracking guy and a great show as well. Have a plan, be passionate about what you do, but be objective and ruthless about some of the decisions you make along the way. On that particular program, Michael recommended that you start at the top with the big picture, which is understanding the market, which helps you to understand your customer and their needs as well. Great show. That was Business Connections Live. It was program 145. That went out nearly a year ago, over a year ago, August 2016. And if you just go to our website at Business Connections Live, just tap in Michael Johnson, or if you wish, Big Brand Lessons, then that'll take you straight to the program and you can watch it in its entirety. It was a cracking show. Michael's actually involved with the insurance side of the AA, and it was a really good program to watch as well. By the way, can we just thank you very much indeed for all the reaction and all the comments that we're getting back on our iTunes. Thousands of you are downloading the program each and every week, and we really do appreciate that. The thing that can really help us, though, is if you leave a comment. If you're really enjoying the programs and you're finding them useful for your business, maybe you're implementing some of the ideas, maybe you're sitting back, maybe it's making you think in a fresh way about the different things happening within your organization, then just leave a comment and recommend it to maybe somebody else that is also downloading, because what happens within iTunes, they've got this wonderful algorithm so that if you leave a comment afterwards, then it will actually recommend it onto somebody else. It's a fantastic way. Let's have a look at the easiest way of doing it. All you got to do is view the program in iTunes, and then just go to the ratings and reviews page. Just click on it there. There it is. Click on that. That'll take you to write a review, and then all I need you to do then is leave a 5-star review, say how great you think the program is, how great you think Jerry is today, how useful the information is, and that'll be absolutely fantastic. And then the iTunes will recommend that to other people that are watching similar styles of programs. So that'll be fantastic. Please do leave a recommendation on iTunes. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's show is Jerry Brown. He is the customer lifeguard. Jerry, let's move on to some of the other areas that we're looking about. Before we do that, though, so you're writing a book at the moment. When's that going to be due out?
Well, I'm hoping, depending on some of the publishing challenges that we all have, certainly hopefully sometime in the new year anyway. So I've pretty much completed what I want to say, but like anything, you've got to have someone look it over and see if it makes some sense. So we're just in that process. So hopefully sometime in the new year, it'll be a combination of some of my experiences, some of the things I've spoken about today and at other times, some ideas that I've got, and I've tried to make it more simple than perhaps some of the things I read. So, not just about customer experience and customer service, but sometimes it really gets really complex. And this is what I've said in the past is one of the reasons people don't do it. It gets a little too hard. They put it in the too difficult drawer, so it doesn't get done. So I've tried to have a balance between understanding what the challenges are, not suggesting it's easy, but trying to lay it out in a way that people can understand.
You've been doing this for a number of years, haven't you? And when you step back, what do you think the big shift change has been? And this is nearly right from the very beginning. This is the indifference, I suppose. But what has been the big shift change? Were we better at it in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s? Or is it just that we're now more vocal about, and it's always been that bad or good?
Well, I think we all think that life was better 50 years ago, but I think the reality is it probably wasn't. And I think what's happened is that clearly social media has had a tremendous impact on making it easier for people to make complaints, do things that they weren't doing some time ago. And I think, interestingly enough, I sort of opened the book with probably the best example, which is the United Breaks Guitars event that happened now 9 years ago. And Dave Carroll, my Canadian friend, who went on to do a YouTube video that has now been viewed by something
United
like
broke my guitar.
17 million people. And I think that had a tremendous effect because YouTube was only just starting at that point. People weren't doing those things. So I think that's alerted people to it. But I think the thing, you asked me what has changed. I think the thing that's changed, and one of the things that I mentioned in one of my 6 reasons or 6 things that I want people to get, is that I think employees have become more engaged and more empowered. Despite the fact that I'm sometimes critical, I think what I'm seeing is there is definitely to use the pun, a sea change in how people are treated. And I think organizations are recognizing that they need to have people on their side. You can't just mandate it. You can't sit someone at the desk and say, right, you will do this. You will say this. And just going back to my experience last week at the awards, talking to a number of people, and I remember asking people about engagement. How do you know your people are engaged? What does engagement mean to you? What does empowerment mean to you? And one of the people that I spoke to said, we've gone away from scripts. We don't have scripts anymore. We trust our employees, and that was a really critical thing. People are beginning to trust.
It's very much a case of letting them be themselves.
Yes, it is indeed. Again, this is something I've spoken and written about a lot. We all have a natural, we want to help people. None of us want to go out of a way to make life difficult for us. But if we're not allowed to do that, if we're, as I put it, many organizations discourage people from displaying their emotions. They ask them to put their emotions in a drawer marked not to be opened during business hours. And as a result, people, this is when you get this robotic, you talk about artificial intelligence. I mean, you could argue that we've been having that for some time. We've had robots answering phone calls for a long time because they're not allowed to do the things they want. When you let people do the things that they do well, and there's still got to be some guidelines. I'm not saying you have anarchy, but you let people respond in the way that they can, through their heart, because this is what most of us are looking for. They're looking for an emotional connection. I've got a problem. I'm stranded in a faraway land. My flight has been canceled. I can't get another one for 5 days. How are you going to help me? Think about how people feel at that moment. And that's what you have to be able to address. So people that can do that, they won't always have a solution. And what I say to people, yes isn't always the answer. It's how you say no sometimes. So getting people to be able to do that is one of the most critical parts of this. And that's what has changed, I think.
I mean, you touched on it earlier on. We are more litigious now, aren't we?
We are.
I mean, litigation seems to be just around the corner. And the ease of being able to escalate a complaint by using social media is nearly tempting for a lot of people.
It really is, and I think organizations have to recognize the cost of doing that. You asked about profit and what it costs, but organizations, when a complaint gets to that stage, if it gets not so much necessarily even litigious, but to the point of a formal complaint. Interesting, you mentioned the Ombudsman. One of the people I was sharing the judging with last week was the Ombudsman for both communications and energy, and he had some very interesting stories. But what happens is when it gets to that level, it's really expensive. So if you complain to a company that's under FCA or Ofcom, Ofgem, Ofwhat regulation, what they have to go through to respond to that and to show that they have responded is very expensive. So you'd think that that alone would do it. So organizations, again, I think are realizing that if they don't respond, it is going to be much, much more expensive for them. And of course, people will go and tell people about it.
I must admit, my personal view is that they tell you to go to the Ombudsman too quickly, and also that they know that it will be troublesome and time-consuming to do that.
Yes.
And by doing that, I think they use that nearly as a soft, not a soft threat. Threat's the wrong word, but definitely a discouragement to continue the complaint any further.
I think it is, because again, from that presentation I did a few months ago, that's exactly what we heard, and it came actually from the Ombudsman Service. This is what people said. It was too much trouble, couldn't be bothered, and it won't work. And so you're right, and it could be because they've had that given to them from other organizations. Say, well, yes, you can complain, Mr. Brown, if you really want to. As you say, it's not a threat, but it's quite a strong suggestion that you don't want to do that.
Do you think there's still confusion within organisations about what engagement and employee engagement is all about? Because it must start there. If the employees are engaged, then you're going to get better customer engagement. And I've worked for organisations where they have congratulated their staff for filling in the employee engagement forms, telling them how well they did for filling the forms in, not realising that in fact the reason they're filling them in is because they're complaining about the management or saying how good the management was. So a real disconnect, people not really understanding what employee engagement is about, and also how you measure it.
I think you're right, and this is why I asked this question last week, because I wanted to understand how they saw it. Quite often, as you quite correctly point out, it's a tick box exercise. Senior executives, have we done our, yeah, we've done it, okay, that's great, we've got that out of the way for the year. And one of the questions I asked was, well, what is the response rate? I mean, that's one of the, in any survey, you know, what sort of response rate are you getting? Are you consistently getting that? And then do you feed it back? Because if you're not feeding it back, same with customer surveys. If I complain to an organization, they go, yep, thanks a lot. You know, we've all been online and we've been instantly handed that survey, if you will, online and asked to fill it out. Well, how many organizations actually feed that back to their customers? And by the same token, how many organizations feed that back to their employees? So the measures that I look for is, you know, are they responding? Are they making changes? And it's a good opportunity to find out if they're really doing something with engagement. And then you start to see people, whether it's through attrition, and that's another way of measuring it. You see an organization, one of the organizations we spoke to last week, when they first started, they were having a very, very big attrition. They put some changes in place. Some of them were empowerment, some of them were engagement, and the attrition rate dropped dramatically. And this wasn't, you know, there's a lot of reasons why attrition may drop, but certainly if you're allowing people to have, as they say, voice of the employee, it will make a difference. And if you publish this, if you share it, it really makes a difference with what organizations can do. And this is why things like the Glassdoor surveys and Bloomberg, where they ask employees for their view, independent views of the business, are very valuable. So businesses that do well in those generally will have engaged people. But it's an ongoing thing, like any aspect of this. You just don't do it once a year and get away with it. More and more businesses are now doing it more frequently.
We talked at the beginning of the program about a sea of indifference. Do you think it's not just a sea of indifference, it's also maybe just a huge amount of lip service? And really they don't, maybe this is the real cause, they don't feed it back because it is no more than a tick box exercise, and it is just lip service that they are giving or providing to customer and employee engagement.
I think there's no question about that. When I mentioned the Which survey earlier on, one of the things that's interesting, if you look at that, if you look at who's top and who's bottom, it's pretty much the same. It doesn't change dramatically, and the people at the bottom of the Which survey are pretty much the same organizations that were there the year before and the year before that. And when you look at that, the only assumption you can come up with is that whatever is going on there, they are clearly not getting through. So whether customer engagement or employee engagement is not making a difference. And it's only when you start to see organizations, and I use the home serve example because it's such a great one of an organization that wasn't just doing poorly. I mean, they had a big issue, and they've totally turned that around.
And when they turned it round,
yes,
did it carry benefits on the bottom line?
Absolutely. The results, they posted some results not so long ago, I think probably in June of this year, which were very impressive. And I say this, and I think I'm pretty independent with this. I'm not working for HomeServe. I became aware of them through meeting Greg Reed. And I just looked at it and I thought, this is such a great story, and this is such a great, to me, it was a tremendous way of showing businesses that if you really do make a difference. I did write a story about it, which you know seemed to hit a lot of strong points for people, and they realized that it made a difference. And I think that when you can show either actually by numbers that it makes a difference, and everything won't be accountable to that, but a lot of it is, then absolutely companies are going to change. But if you think about the organizations that typically come at the bottom of that Which survey, which are mobile phone companies and telecoms and so on, you know, I think their view of the world is, well, we're going to lose 200,000 people this month, we'll gain another 210, that's okay, so we'll keep going. And I think for those organizations, yes, there probably will be a day of reckoning, but I don't know when that will happen.
People like, well, there are large energy companies that are doing this all the time, Jerry.
Sure.
Save that thought for a moment. You're watching Business Connections Live. It's great to have your company. We're live here on a Monday, and Jerry Brown, the Customer Lifeguard, is my guest in today's programme. Well, as always, it's great to have you with us. Don't forget, we're here every Monday. It's good to know that you're enjoying the programs. As I said earlier on, thank you very much indeed for the thousands of downloads that we're getting on iTunes. iTunes actually probably is now becoming the primary delivery portal for the program. But over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be expanding. We're going to be on a number of different live streaming channels as well. Already in the States, we're on Roku, and that's proving to be very successful. Of course, you can also pick the program up as a podcast as well by going to Stitcher or Blueberry or a whole host of other podcast delivery methods as well. But as I said, iTunes is truly proving to be the most popular of them all. Incidentally, if you'd like to support the program, and we really do invite this, if you'd like to support the program, it isn't one way. It isn't like, you know, you can watch the programs if you pay this particular fee. What we try to do is that maybe you'd like to come on the program, but there is ways to come on the program and support the program, and we do that via a platform called Patreon, and it's dead easy to do that. The graphics actually on Patreon have changed just recently, but all you got to do is just go to our website at businessconnectionslive.com, find the big orange banners that say Patreon, particularly there. If you like the show, then support us on Patreon. Just click on that link. It'll take you to our Patreon page. Look, shot there of Nikki Creel from last week. And if you go onto the page, all you got to do is then say, well, just down the right, you'll see, I want to be a founder Patreon. And you'll get a whole host of different rewards that you can then get involved with the program. And it can be anything from a couple of dollars all the way up to maybe, well, if you're a big corporate user, maybe $1,000 or so dollars. Absolutely fantastic. Do support us on Patreon and keep Business Connections Live growing and providing the programs to you and your business on a weekly basis. And if you do that this week, can I just say from all of us here at Business Connections Live, thank you very much indeed. You're watching Business Connections Live. Joining me in the studio today is Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard. Just check out his website, by the way. It is in the throes of being revitalized and reutilized. You can find out more about Jerry himself there. The services he provides, a very interesting blog, by the way, that he produces on a regular basis. And, you know, just good stuff that you can apply to your business as well. And as you can see, it's not just one of these 500-word blogs that somebody throws up so they've got content on the internet. This is well thought out, educational, instructional content that you can actually apply to your business. It's a cracking website with some really good content. And if you want to improve your customer experience, your employee engagement, then I do suggest very strongly that you go to Jerry's website, the Customer Lifeguard, and you'll find it at customerlifeguard.com. Okay then, Jerry, we're into the final throes of today's programme.
Sure.
We kind of touched just before the break there on organisational engagement, and you said it's more than the sum of the parts. Well,
Indeed.
Does that apply to all sizes of businesses?
It does. I think in many cases, when you think about organizations, a lot of the challenges that people have with customer service or customer experience is that they think, oh, well, it's not our fault. It's the billing department has made a mistake, or the delivery part, you know, whatever it happens to be. So there's a lot of moving parts. And this, of course, is the difference between customer experience, which is all of the things that go on, and customer service, which might be one single interaction people have. So getting the whole business engaged is important. Quite often when organizations look to improve things, they say, well, we're going to bring in our customer service team for training or education, whatever it happens to be, and they forget about the rest of the company. So it's absolutely important, and a good starting point for me with any organization is to have a cross-functional team together. Now that cross-functional team may be 3 people. If you have a small business, in any small business, we all play different roles. I'm a small business person. You know, some days I'm the managing director, and some days I'm the janitor, and I'm not sure which one of those is the most important. But the point is that if you bring these people together, and you don't have to have a huge number of people, but in, let's say, a medium-sized organization, you want some representation from customer service, perhaps from the engineering team, perhaps from the shipping department, whatever it happens to be, the key people in that organization, bringing them together, listening, having them listen to each other's challenges and issues. All of a sudden they go, oh, I didn't realize that. Well, oh, I see. Well, if I do this, and they begin to do that. So when I say it's more than the sum of the parts, what it means is that that organization now has organizational engagement, all of those people together, and they will want to make a difference. If you give people the opportunity to do this is the same as empowerment and engagement. If you give them the opportunity, they will relish it. Most people will take that on board. And any organization I've talked to will find they have lots of volunteers to help. Once you, again, got to be serious. The CEO's got to be serious about making changes. But once he or she makes that point, people will, you know what? They do want to make a difference. And this was, again, very evident. HomeServe is a great example of how they brought all those people together from different parts of the business to come up with solutions that would address some of the customer issues that they had.
Do you see a common mistake in as much as that the senior management teams will think that it's somebody else's job to do that, so they don't get involved with it?
I think that does happen, and I think one of the things that you see when you see these, some of the TV programs, some of the reality programs, you know, where the secret boss and the boss gets involved and goes in and becomes a customer, that's actually very important. It's a very important first step. So I often encourage senior people,
walk the floor.
Well, I ask them the question, when was the last time you sat in and listened to phone calls in your contact center? When was the last time you went out with one of your delivery people? And, you know, sometimes they shift nervously, but, you know, that's a starting point. And once they begin to understand that, yes, it's important that they stay involved and then they lead it. That doesn't mean that they have to be involved in every meeting, but they have to be pretty visible. They have to be part of that. Again, my HomeServe example is a good example of that. Greg Reed, who's now the CEO, here's a guy that's absolutely engaged, is absolutely passionate about this. And he goes out and speaks quite a lot about this, so you'll probably find some chances to go and see a guy like Greg Reed, because he is walking the walk and talking the talk. And when you see people like that, you know it can be done. Can it be done in the biggest industries? I don't see why not. I think if you look at businesses that have been successful, these people are out there. They are engaging with their employees. They know who they are. And for the most part, that's one of the keys to success, getting the senior management involved initially, staying involved, staying engaged, keeping the momentum going.
So that leads on to nearly the final question before we do the summary. In your opinion then, is the customer experience, is it being lost in the sea of indifference, yes or no?
I'd say it's not. And of course, you'd say, "Well, why did you put that in the first place?" I guess I mentioned I was judging last week. It really brought my faith in human nature when I saw some of those people, and I thought, you know what? Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps I've been too hasty to criticize. Because when I saw many of those people, again, from different businesses, different sizes, I thought, you know, these people care about it. And so I think probably I'm always a glass half full guy than a glass half empty. So I think there is hope for the future, let's put it that way.
Well, that's really good, isn't it? Listen, we're nearly at the end of the programme. Do you think there's anything else that it would be key to remind our viewers about when it comes to employee engagement? We've touched on the fact that it doesn't matter what size organisation you have. Is there, I mean, I'm going to ask you to give the key takeaways in just a few moments' time, but is there anything that you think that we've probably missed that would be, that is the panacea of all information, you know, that little piece of the jigsaw that most companies, when they start up, they miss out getting?
Well, I think the thing that I mentioned about having the boss go and spend time in different parts of the organization, I also encourage lots of, whether you want to call it job sharing or whatever it is, but I think one of the things that really makes a difference is when you have one of the people in the shipping department sit in and listen to phone calls, have someone in the customer service department go out with a delivery driver, really begin to live the business. When they understand all of the things that go on, it's a lot harder for them to say, well, it's our delivery people, they're the problem. I think organizations miss that opportunity because that's relatively low cost. There's you don't have to do a lot to do that. You know, all right, you may have to put an extra shift on somewhere, but getting all of those people to see all parts of the business, to live that business, I think probably the single biggest thing many businesses could and should do.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure having you on the programme today. Don't forget, if you want to go to Jerry's website, it is thecustomerlifeguard.com if you want to go along to that. Jerry, as always, at the end of each and every programme, I'm just going to show you also the homepage as well so that you remember and you recognise the guy. I love the orange. The site has been redesigned at the moment, and it may look different when you come to get to it in the near future, but Jerry, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. So then, who you are, where you're from, straight down this camera over here. See, we've got no numbers on the front of them today. Who you are and where you're from, and the key takeaways to today's programme.
Thank you again, Steve. I'm Jerry Brown, the Customer Lifeguard, and as far as I'm concerned, if we don't get our people behind the work that we're doing, if we don't engage them, if we don't empower them, if we don't get them emotionally connected with our customers, then the chances of getting any of our customers to do business with us again is going to be very, very, very much restricted. And while you think, well, Jerry, that all sounds obvious, I think we all know that we've dealt with organizations that don't do that particularly well. So it's really what I call the easy way: engagement, empowerment, emotional connection, empathy, and enablement. The last one being, if you enable your people to do the right thing for your customers, then you have a far better chance of making customer experience work for you, not just today, but in the future.
Jerry, fantastic. Really enjoyed today's promo. I love the whole area of customer experience and employee engagement. And as always, bringing you on the programme was always an absolute pleasure for us to have you on here. So thank you very much indeed, Jerry. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Hope
Steve.
you've enjoyed today's program. It's been a real cracker, hasn't it? Okay, then, that wraps up today's particular show. So who we got lined up in the next couple of weeks to come on the programme? Well, on next week's programme, we're going to be talking to Michael Dodd about how to stand up to tough questions in business. Interestingly, this week, we're actually going to be doing a media training course for a large multinational organisation, and many of the techniques that Mike is going to be talking about, we're going to be teaching our students when they come into the studio. But could you be up to being interviewed by the media? How do you handle tough questions when they're maybe put to you by your employees? Well, Michael Dodd will be explaining how you go about standing up to those tough questions in business, because at the end of the day, you're the boss and you should know the answer. On future programmes, we've got Kate Cook, we've got Julian Ponan, who was recently on Dragon's Den. She was actually offered a deal, I think, by Deborah Meenan, and then later on she turned it down. We've also got Warren Knight coming up as well. But listen, from all of us here at Business Connections Live, thank you very much indeed for joining us till we do it all again. Here at Business Connections Live. Please keep watching the programmes. It's all gone quiet for a moment.
I'm James Griffin from Iris Software, and my team have just